just returned to West Bureau, and I thought it was a good, overall, a good evening.
Absolutely, and a speaker for our new leader of the Urban League here in Los Angeles, and that was a very good opportunity to exchange thoughts.
No, yes, Nolan Rollins. Yes.
Madam President, the next night I attended the Valley Bureau's Hispanic Forum, and that was hosted and organized by Commander Papa out there, and it was a good forum, and a lot of good ideas came out of it. She asked for ideas, and some I plan to raise with the Commission and with the Chief at a later date, some ideas on how we can better serve both the Valley and the Hispanic community.
Any other comments? Then I will turn now to the report of the Chief of Police.
Good morning, Commissioners. As you are well aware, this morning at just before 5 a.m., two Los Angeles police detectives were returning from a follow-up investigation to their home station, Wilshire Station, as they were attired in plain clothes, driving a plain car. As they began to enter the gateway to the parking lot of Wilshire Station and attempted to use the access code that admits cars to that gateway, they were approached by a male African-American, 30 to 35 years of age, medium build, with facial hair described as a mustache and a goatee, attired in all-black clothing. He produced a handgun and fired multiple rounds at the officers, striking one of the detectives in the back of the head with a graze wound and causing shrapnel that injured the other detectives. The two detectives returned fire, fired multiple rounds at the assailant, and the assailant fled on foot. There is a large perimeter in the Wilshire area that I know the Commissioners are familiar with, and the search continues. We have deployed all available search canines from the Los Angeles Police Department, and those are being augmented by 4 additional search teams from the LA County Sheriff's Department. My thanks to Lee Baca for that. We will try to complete that search as fast as is humanly possible. I ask for the public's indulgence, though. This was a blatant attempt to assassinate 2 of the people that try to protect this community, and we certainly must pursue all avenues to bring this individual into custody. There is no known motive at this time. We have no nexus to any current events in the city, nor does it appear to be a nexus to any of the other police stations. We are, however, on alert at all our other facilities because of this incident. And to continue with my normal report on crime, crime continues to decline in the city of Los Angeles as compared to 2012. Homicides are down 13%, rapes are down a little over 30%, robberies down 13.3%, aggravated assaults down 9.7%. Total violent crime reduction is 12.5% compared to 2012 and 19% compared to 2011. Property crime is also down in all 4 categories that are measured via the Part 1 status, 5.5% in total. It means a total aggregate Part 1 crime reduction of just under 7%. Gang crime is also down in the city of Los Angeles. Total gang crime is down 21.5% as compared to 2012 and just under 31% compared to 2011. That's of significant note. Gang homicides are down 29.8% compared to last year. Outside of Part 1 crime, shootings are down in the city. Shots fired reports are down in the city. All of our 4 geographic bureaus are seeing reductions in crime. So it is an across-the-board reduction. Personnel statistics, we have 9,968 sworn personnel on payroll. We have 43 recruits in the academy who are not yet on payroll, so that gives us a sworn strength of 10,011 police officers. We have 269 Level 1 reserves, 21 Level 2s, 128 Level 3s, 371 specialist volunteers, and 34 chaplains. Civilian staffing, we have 2,829 civilian personnel and have 518 civilian vacancies. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chief, and from all of us on the Commission, all of our thoughts, of course, are with the officers and family and all of the officers in the station.
And thank you, Commissioners. I met with both the officers. They're in good spirits. They had returned from the hospital on their own accord in order to help with the manhunt. They're extremely concerned about this suspect still being outstanding and the threat that he poses not only to the community in general, but to the Los Angeles Police Department in particular.
Thank you. Go now to report of the Executive Director.
Good morning, Madam President, members of the Commission. No report today.
Report of the Inspector General.
Yes, Madam President, just briefly, want to let the Commission know that the IG Office's risk management audit will be on calendar next week, and also to let you know that I will be attending a community meeting in Hollywood later this evening between 6 to 9 p.m. And that concludes my report.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Madam President, we do have 4 public comment cards on item 3, although there's no report. That would be Thelmy Perez, Barbara Lott Holland, Deborah Burton, and Hamid Khan.
Good morning. My name is Thelmy Perez. I'm a human rights defender with the LA Human Rights Collective. It's a little disheartening that there is no report this morning because last week a diverse group of residents from the city of Los Angeles came to present some very serious concerns with allegations that were made and evidence that was filed against Deborah Burton, a fellow human rights defender, by Lieutenant Paulson of the LAPD. And these allegations that were made, or in this evidence that was presented, there were allegations that Ms. Burton used a weapon against the director of the CCEA, a downtown business organization. What we've found through thousands of pages of documents, of public documents, is that in fact this woman, Estela Lopez, and Lieutenant Paulson were collaborating and trying to bring forth some kind of charges, were clearly conspiring to bring charges against LA CAN and members of the human rights community. So we're here today is to ask for you to take seriously an investigation, because what happened in the last week is that Commander Maislin had written to us to say that he did an investigation, but was clearly not based on what we presented last week. So today what we're going to do is we're going to bring to your attention specifically what we need for this commission to do and what we need for the Chief of Police and the Executive Director to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara Holland.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Barbara Lott Holland. I am a human and civil rights organizer with the Labor Community Strategy Center and the Bus Riders Union. And I am here today in collaboration with the Human Rights Collective and is very concerned with this case. We feel that our rights are being squashed, literally squashed, that there seems to be an attempt to stop all organizing, which is illegal, and we have the right to do this. We have seen it over and over again, and we actually really want it to end. One of the things that we are requesting in particular in Deborah Burton's case is that you not just listen to us, be kind and listen to us. This is our second week here asking for some action from this commission. In the case of Deborah, there was presented or said to have videotapes of her actually and deliberately abusing someone, or I don't even want to repeat it, blowing a toy horn in their ear. But there has been no evidence that this commission has actually investigated. There were 4 cameras on site that day. And there has been no one that's asked for those cameras to see the physical harm that was allegedly done by Deborah. So we are asking this commission to please take action, do a real investigation on the charges, or the alleged charges for Deborah Burton. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deborah Burton.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Deborah Burton.
Morning.
I'm here this morning to express my disappointment with you. As a civilian oversight, we expected you to investigate the evidence submitted in my case, but you haven't. None of you have contacted me to ask some questions. I will start trial tomorrow. I am innocent, and I will continue to work to hold you accountable to the community. More important that you have been to me personally.
And Hamid Khan.
Good morning. My name is Hamid Khan with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and the LA Human Rights Collective. Last Tuesday, on June 18th, we, the people, came to you, the commissioners, to look into a specific case against Deborah Burton, and particularly the evidence and discovery documents regarding Lieutenant Shannon Paulson's role in this case. As far as we know, no investigation on your part has occurred. In response to our testimony, we received an email from Commander Stuart Maitland. The department's response was not related to what our complaint even was and is not acceptable to us. He seems to have simply read the emails submitted, applied them to an unrelated complaint, and done no further investigation to find out what else may have happened related to this case. Our request was of you, the commissioners, in your oversight role to investigate LAPD officers' actions related to this case. The documents we submitted to you were just a sample of the hundreds of emails obtained through public records, primarily between Lieutenant Paulson and the alleged victim, Estela Lopez, regarding the legal protest activities and the eventual alleged crime. However, there are many troubling statements by Lieutenant Paulson in that sample, particularly her attempts to find people who are willing to be victims and her blatant attempts to protect CCEA at the expense of other stakeholders, particularly the Los Angeles Community Action Network. There are many more documents that probably aren't public since they are part of an investigation, as well as videos of the incident. None of the documents or videos we've seen support Lieutenant Paulson's allegations, and we believe there is evidence showing the distinct possibility that she submitted faulty evidence, abused her power, and specifically targeted LACAN's legal First Amendment activities for criminal charges. We believe Lieutenant Paulson inappropriately coordinated with Estela Lopez in creating the supposed evidence for these charges that she misrepresents in what is on the videos that she submitted as evidence. So we, the people, are here today, again, that we demand transparency, we demand you to uphold public trust, we demand an answer, and we urge you to investigate and withdraw any faulty evidence or statements by Lieutenant Paulson that are not supported by the evidence. We ask you to come out from behind this ivory tower and talk to the people. We demand an answer.
Thank you.
We demand an answer.
And we have no other cards on this item, Madam President.
And when are we going to get an answer for this thing? Because the trial begins tomorrow.
Thank you.
We demand an answer. This is unjust. This is complete injustice. We demand an answer.
We demand an answer.
We are now going to move to the information filed items. There are noise variance permits on file as submitted of the period ending June 21st, 2013, and there are 6 listed. More information is in the agenda. B, there's a special event permits on file as submitted for the period ending June 21, 2013. Are there any presentations today?
No, ma'am, there are not.
The consent agenda is 7A through L.
Move approval of items 7A through L.
Is there a
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Did you recuse yourself?
On 8. Thank you, John.
Oh, okay.
We are now on 8, which is our regular agenda items. We will be hearing 8A, 8B, 8C, 8H, and 8I. Yeah, we will hear A and B together, but I have a motion first.
Madam President, move approval of agenda items 8D, E, F, G, and J.
Second?
Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Maybe we can just quickly,
Take care of H.
H, yes. This is the department's report relative to the memorandum of agreement between the Los Angeles Police Department and the University of Southern California regarding training of University of Southern California public safety officers as set forth.
I move approval of regular agenda item 8H.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
It was a unanimous except for Commissioner Saltzman, who was recused. And now we'll go to AB. We will now call up Police Administrator Gerald Shaliff, Department's report, which is A, and the Inspector General B.
Morning. I've submitted a report to the Commission. I'll be more than happy to do a brief summary of what it says. After the incidents relating to Christopher Dorner and his actions in which he killed 4 people, and there was some and he issued his last resort manifesto. There were some individuals who came forward and said he was correct about some of his complaints and his charges against the police department, and that he was terminated from the department because he was a whistleblower. I assume if you read through it all, because he was black, so therefore it was unjust, and he was doing all this to reclaim his name. Now, it's hard to understand why, especially as a defense lawyer, why killing your lawyer's daughter is helpful in reclaiming your name, but the chief, acknowledging the fact that the department had in the past treated employees badly, had acted against people who wanted to come forward and complain about things the department was doing. Even though he felt that the department has changed, we've been through the consent decrees. You know, we have really been relieved from that. This department is a different department than it was when most of the people who were writing these allegations or coming forward have been involved. But the chief felt it was important to have an independent review and a relook at all of the activities around the termination of Christopher Dorner and some of his claims in the manifesto. This report is the first of 2. Actually, it's the first of 3 things that the chief instituted. The first one was this report relating to Mr. Dorner's termination. The second is a far more wide-sweeping report relating to the discipline system of the department. And there was about 500 to 600 individuals in the department, sworn and civilian, who took part in what you might call a highly technicalized focus groups, where it's called 10,000 Votes, where people sit at computers and they have discussions, and it's all done through computer. They have smaller groups that get together, but everything gets into the computer, and then the data is reviewed, which is what's going on now. And sometime in the fall, we'll have a report relating to that will be undoubtedly authored by myself and Assistant Chief MacArthur and others who were involved in that process. The third thing we're doing is that the chief, in response to some of the individuals who said they were terminated unfairly, tasked my office with reviewing those, and anybody who wanted to have it reviewed was told to notify my office. We sent them the protocols, which required some a declaration or affidavit stating what the new evidence was or what the issues they felt were. We explained to everybody that the chief, pursuant to the city's charter, has a 3-year window in which if somebody makes application, he can order a rehearing or a new board. After 3 years, his powers are limited, but we still said that we would review those who were terminated. If somebody had sought review through the courts, the initial response would be that they have received their day in court, but still, if they had something new, that will be reviewed too. There was a team put together with people assigned who are to my office, who are specialists in investigating these internal affairs type of activities, and we've begun to process those. When we finish on each individual case, if they are appropriate, because we have gotten requests from people who are still in the department, which is not what we were going to review, to civilian members of the department, which they have a different system through the Civil Service Commission. They don't have the Board of Rights, which was what the chief asked us to review. And so we've responded to them, telling them what the appropriate avenue is for redress, and we are dealing with the ones that have come forth. We are still in single digits in people who want to review it, and they range from people who were terminated 35 years ago up to some people who were, I think we have one case where somebody was actually terminated within that 3-year window, which we're reviewing. Everybody was given 60 days to respond. All the notifications are sent out by registered mail, and as the responses come in, we will review them. If they don't meet the 60-day requirement, the opportunity will be lost unless they have some really good reason why. And we can think of a myriad of reasons, but I will say that everybody will be treated as fairly as possible, and we'll give everybody as deep a review as we can within the guidelines that are set. So that's the third part of what we're doing. Now, what's here today is the report that was written relating to the termination of Mr. Dorner. In preparing for this report, not only was I given additional staff, but I reviewed, and it's listed on page 1 and 2 of the report. And I think that's a partial listing because there's all other things. I reviewed every piece of paper, every document, every transcript, every court decision, every letter that were in the files, and they amounted to thousands of pages. And I read everything at least twice, and prepared for this as if I was preparing for one of the cases that I had done over the years. And I reviewed numerous television, newspaper, blog reports about issues that people raised. And the charter of the City of Los Angeles, the applicable law of the State of California, which is the Police Officers' Bill of Rights and Government Code Section 3300, which is the reason why in this report you will not see many names of individuals involved because of the restrictions of Government Code Section 3300, and I was overly cautious to ensure that we didn't create an issue where there was no need to be one. And as we all know, the background of what happened was the actions of Mr. Dorner, but part of which he claimed had to do with his termination. His termination occurred in 2009. In 2007, July 28th of 2007, he and his training officer took part in an arrest that occurred in San Pedro at a DoubleTree. And 13 days later, he came forward and alleged that his training officer had kicked the person they were arresting 3 times, twice in the shoulder and once in the face. And immediately a complaint investigation was begun. The complaint was, as pursuant to the consent decree, was sent to Professional Standards Bureau. Professional Standards Bureau reviewed the complaint initially, determined that it was for excessive force, which meant the Professional Standards Bureau would investigate it, not the area. And investigators were appointed or selected. The investigation began. I'll go into more detail as to what some of the things that occurred, but witnesses were interviewed, and it was determined at the end that it was the belief of the chain of command that the allegations were untrue, and in fact that Christopher Dorner had submitted a false allegation, and therefore there were a number of allegations against him, and it was sent to a Board of Rights. At the Board of Rights, there were 14 witnesses that testified, and at the conclusion of it, the board determined that the charges against him were true and recommended termination, and the chief of police at the time, Chief Bratton, agreed, and Officer Dorner was terminated. He also then appealed to the Inspector General through a letter, and I think at that time the Inspector General was Nicole Bershon. They looked at some of the materials involved and responded to him. I think it took him a year, responded to him that they felt the termination was appropriate. He appealed to the Superior Court, as is the next level from a Board of Rights, and the Superior Court sustained the termination. He then appealed to the Court of Appeals, and that was also sustained. Now, the complaint process is detailed in this report, and I don't, unless you want me to, I won't go through all of it, but just to give people the background of how it goes. It doesn't just happen because somebody says, I want to complain against somebody. They have to go through a process of filing a complaint. A complaint gets filed. You can file it almost any way you can think of, and then it goes up. It gets investigated, it goes up, it's reviewed by the area, by the Bureau, by the chief, as it goes through the process. So it took a while, but this decision was reviewed by many people, and a determination was made that they should proceed against Officer Dorner and a Board of Rights. The Board of Rights process itself is a process that's been around since the 20s, if not before. And initially, the Police Commission determined whether people should be terminated or not, for reasons known to the history of Los Angeles, which had to do with the 20s and 30s, when it's a lot more profitable to be on the Police Commission than since they were selling promotions and doing other things. A lieutenant then named William Parker designed the Board of Rights system, which is basically based on the military's court-martial system. And over the years, there's been a number of changes. After the Christopher Commission report, there were another change made, and now the board consists of 2 command officers, captains or above, and a civilian who's approved of by the commission and trained by the commission staff. The way the people are selected is that the officer or his representative or his lawyer get to pick 4 names out of it's actually kind of a box, and they get to select 2 of them. If the officer has, or his lawyer or representative, have a complaint about an officer, one of the ones that were selected, they have the right to have that officer or that command officer eliminated if they can show any good cause. I raise that because Christopher Dorner in his manifesto claimed that there were some conflicts, but there's no record anywhere that either he or his lawyer complained. There were 2 officers selected, and the same process goes with the civilian, where I think it's 3 they have a pick from. They get 1, and they have the same right to complain, and again, that didn't happen. So in this case, you now had a system that's gone on forever. The rules are pretty much the rules of court. There's a little difference about hearsay, where you can't just rely on hearsay to come to a decision. Each side is represented. The officer in this case had a lawyer. The department had an advocate who is not a lawyer but is trained. From reviewing all the transcripts, it appeared both did a very conscientious and thorough job. This was a hard-fought Board of Rights. The Board of Rights then issued their rationale, and the Board of Rights heard from 13 individuals, and the 14th testimony was through the investigator's report of one of the witnesses at the location of the arrest, because that witness could not be located. So they were allowed to read, I think it was a female, her testimony into the record. That's how we started. That's how I started this process. And as I said, I've read everything that I could find, including in the newspaper articles and in the manifesto complaints that were and allegations that were made. Most of the allegations of Mr. Dorner that were specific to his termination related to relationships between individuals. So we interviewed all the individuals to determine if there was these arrangements. He stated that the chair of the board had a relationship with the advocate, which both denied. That the advocate had a relationship with the training officer, which both denied. That the training officer had a relationship with her supervisor, over and above just working together, that they denied. He also alleged that the training officer's lawyer made an admission that the training officer had admitted these excessive force, these kicks, which he adamantly denied. And so we interviewed everybody we could to see if any of these relationships and there was no proof that any of them existed. So I began to look at, okay, now we should look at what evidence supported the allegations of Mr. Dorner, what evidence were contrary to that. Understanding that at a Board of Rights, the burden of proof is on the department. The department has to prove that the allegations of Mr. Dorner were false. Otherwise, he would be found not guilty, or they would not be sustained, and therefore he would not receive any punishment. So throughout this, it was the department's burden to prove this. So the first thing I looked at was there were three people who worked at this hotel who, well, before I get into that, let me do a little more of the process. What happens is, as soon as there's a use of force, the officers are required to notify a supervisor, who then conducts a use of force investigation and interviews witnesses. And that's important because that's how the three people who were at the hotel were located. They were there. A sergeant arrived on the scene within minutes of this use of force occurring. And by the use of force, I mean during the incident, the person who was arrested, who had been apparently sitting in the hotel, they had called the police about him because he wasn't a guest and it was disturbance. He then went outside, sat at a bench. When the officers approached, they asked him to get up and come with them, and at some point while they got him up, and while they were walking with him, he began to swing his arms or his elbows and then began to run away. Officer Dorner began, now the arrestee weighed about 250 and Officer Dorner weighed about 300 pounds. The training officer probably weighed 110. She was a female who was probably 5'2", and Dorner was probably 6'2", 6'3", and the arrestee was probably 6 feet, so they were two large individuals. Eventually, they began tussling, and Officer Dorner either tackled or in tussling with him pushed him, and they fell into a planter box. The planter box consisted of a number of shrubs with kind of thick, strong branches, and Dorner and the arrestee fell through the bushes and created a giant space of where the bushes had been. During that fall, the arrestee landed virtually face first on the ground, kind of on his left side a little, with his right hand underneath him. Officer Dorner was on top of him, and the training officer was behind. Eventually, she removed his taser, Officer Dorner's taser, tasered the arrestee a couple of times because he wouldn't cooperate and he wouldn't show his right hand. And as you know, officers are always very concerned about what's going on when somebody has their hand either under themselves or in a place where the officers can't see it because they don't know what, if any, weapons the person has. Eventually, he showed his hands, and he appeared to be either under the influence of something or have a mental illness issue because when they were asking for his hand, he kept saying, "What arm? I don't have an arm." And some of his responses were irrational. They eventually got him up. This whole event probably took, according to the witnesses, maybe 90 seconds at the most, 60 to 90 seconds, and he was arrested. Just as he was getting up, a Port Police officer arrived to assist. And then the officers, Officer Dorner, his training officer, reported what had happened about the arrest and the use of force of tackling him and going into the bushes, and the uninvolved supervisor arrived to do the use of force investigation. So, in other words, I then had to review the use of force investigation and what the officer obtained, the complaint investigation, which related to initially to the allegations of Officer Dorner, and then you had a Board of Rights testimony of all the witnesses. And so the first part I looked at was the 3 individuals who worked at the location, and they all saw parts of what happened. They all probably think they saw all of it, but they didn't. And as what normally happens with one of these events that happens very quickly, witnesses' recollections differ and they change over time, which is what happened a little of this. But none of them saw these kicks that Officer Dorner alleged happened. And in his testimony, Officer Dorner stated these were pretty violent kicks, that they got increasingly violent. The first one in the chest, the second one I think was in the shoulder, and then the third one, which supposedly was in the face. And when asked to describe it, was if somebody had been walking down the street and kicked a can or kicked an object. So you had to sort of wind up to kick it, but the kicks got progressively more violent. When they lifted the individual up, he had a cut under his left eye and a small 1/4 inch little laceration, which was described as a minor scratch or a laceration, and there was no indication that it was a result of a violent kick to the face. So that was the first thing. So there was no evidence there to support Officer Dorner. In fact, it refuted his claims. So then I went on to look at, was there any physical evidence? The officer was wearing standard, and I keep forgetting the name, boots? Boots. No, I mean, there's a name for them that they were.
No advertising.
And no advertising, no product placement here. And there was, as the board noted, there was no dirt transfer because apparently, according to the training officer and some of the witnesses, she got into the planter box too. There was no transfer onto his shirt, and he was wearing a white shirt as if she had kicked him while picking up dirt. But so then the question became, okay, what did Officer Dorner say, and why did he delay for 13 days to report this? Because this supposedly happened July 28th, and he didn't report it till August 10th. So I then began to look at all of the evidence related to when he reported it, why he reported it, and what he said about why he didn't report it. And I came up with what happened, and this is, to me, the key to Officer Dorner's credibility, was he had a number of excuses, some of which were inconsistent with other. They changed over time, and they seemed to be expedient depending on who was asking the question or what they were asking. The first opportunity he had to report these kicks, which he at some point believed were excessive, was when the sergeant arrived to do the use of force report. And what happens is the sergeant interviews everybody, including the officers, and he interviews them separately. So and there's no issue in this case that he didn't separate them. He did. I think he talked to the training officer first, and he talked to Officer Dorner. And when asked, Officer Dorner did not say or report these kicks. He reported everything else, but he didn't report these kicks. When asked why, over the course of time, either in the investigation or in the Board of Rights, he came up with a number of answers, which were, he was not sure he was supposed to mention it, and he acknowledged later that he'd been trained that you have to report everything that happens during use of force. It would be in the arrest report, so he didn't have to mention it at the scene, which is clearly contrary to his training. The uninvolved supervisor only asked about what he did, which again was refuted by the supervisor. He was not sure the kicks were wrong, but you don't report just what's wrong. You report all the activities that related to force. The uninvolved supervisor and the training officer were good friends. This was a constant theme that went through every time he didn't tell somebody something is because they were good friends with somebody or the training officer. He then said at the end of his interview, he heard the uninvolved. He was then thinking that he should. Okay, now he should tell the sergeant, the supervisor. But as the supervisor was walking away, he heard him tell the training officer, "Your stories are congruent." And then he said he didn't know if he consciously decided not to mention the kicks, and finally, fear of retaliation, which becomes an issue later on. The next thing that happens is when they arrest somebody, they take that arrestee to a watch commander. In this case, the watch commander was a lieutenant. He didn't mention it to also a female, didn't mention it to her. When stated why, he said she was friends with the training officer too, and also she was the type that you didn't speak to unless she spoke to you. But one of the questions they asked the arrestee is, "Are you hurt?" And if Officer Dorner standing next to her, he easily could have said, "Well, yeah, he got kicked in the face." He didn't mention it. The next place is they then took the arrestee to 77th, because this would have been at Harbor. They took him to 77th where there was a medical facility. And he said he didn't tell the nurse what caused the injury because the nurse asked him to leave her alone, or him alone. I don't know what the sex of the nurse was. And this is contrary to jail policy and police procedure because the police officer who escorts the arrestee is instructed that they have to remain present through the entire time and not leave the arrestee alone with a medical staff member. Officer Dorner said he had handcuffed him to a chair, and that is not the way they would have done it. So that's another issue. Then you get to the arrest report. He then says, while returning to the station from 77th, his training officer said, "We're not going to mention these kicks in the report," which she denied, and that he was going to write the arrest report. His testimony was, it's not in the arrest report, and if you read the arrest report, it's all written from as if he wrote it, which is what the testimony of the training officer and the supervisor who did the use of force report both testified to. He says he got up to the point where they were escorting the gentleman away from the bench outside, and he and the training officer got into an argument about who the arrestee was trying to hit, and that she took over and wrote the rest. By her own testimony, she said she at some point made some stylistic changes, which is exactly what the supervisor said he did, because it took Officer Dorner a very long time. But nobody changed any of the facts, nobody removed anything, and nobody added anything. Officer Dorner then signed the arrest report. He also signed the city attorney acknowledgement form, which says the arrest report's complete, true, and accurate. When he testified and when he was interviewed, he denied reading it before he signed it and didn't read it till a day or two later when the next time he came to work and went into the record section. There was an issue about that because he had signed it, and it appeared to be signed that night because there's his signature right under it as the training officer, but he says he didn't read it, he just signed it. As part of that arrest package, there's a unified, let me give you the exact name. Out of the arrest report, it's called the Los Angeles County Unified Arrestee Medical Screening Form. Officer Dorner filled out part of it, and what he wrote on the medical screening form filled out that night, or that morning, was when they asked, does the arrestee have any illnesses or injuries, in his own handwriting, which he admitted, he wrote, minor scratch on face. Another opportunity to express what happened, which he did not do. They then asked him, okay, why did it take you so long to report this? And he went through a lot of explanation, but one of them, which was there was only one supervisor down at Harbor that he trusted. And he and that supervisor did not work the same shifts between July 28th and August the 10th. Well, the evidence was that they worked 5 days previously on the same shifts. When asked about that, and maybe 4 days, I don't want to misstate it. And when asked about that, Officer Dorner said, well, you know, probationers leave roll calls early, and there was one time when I asked him, I saw him as he was leaving, and he asked if it was important, and Dorner said, well, I'll catch you tomorrow or something. But it was 13 days later. There is evidence that the night before the 10th, which was August the 9th, he called a friend, somebody he knew who was a sergeant in internal affairs, and asked him, said, I got this problem, and started to talk about what happened. And according to the sergeant's testimony, the internal affairs sergeant was, stop, just go report it immediately, don't tell me anymore. Officer Dorner's testimony is just conflicted about what their conversation was, but the next morning, Officer Dorner talks to the supervisor at Harbor and reports it. What happens in between is the training officer says the last time they worked together, which was August 4th, she told him that if he didn't improve, she was going to have to give him an unsatisfactory rating. He testified that an unsatisfactory rating was something all probationers feared, and that that's one thing you wanted to avoid. She, on that date, said she did it. She also filled out his ratings, and they get ratings every week when you're going through training. And because he'd been in the department for longer than would be normal for the training, but he'd been deployed over in Iraq, I believe, and it had taken him 13 months to go through the academy because of he had shot himself in the hand, or had accidentally when he was cleaning his gun, and had some shoulder injuries. So it took him a lot longer. So he was still, even though he'd been longer than the 18 months, he was still in training. Her last rating on August the 4th listed 3 areas where he needed to improve. Report writing, which is what she said she talked to him about. Officer safety, because apparently he had approached somebody in a situation where he just sort of walked up to him, which was an unsafe way. And the third one was using good judgment or common sense. That rating he received August 9th because he signed for it that day. That may have been a coincidence that the next day he went in and reported her, but it shows up again later on when something happens, and then the next day he goes and makes a claim of retaliation. So eventually this complaint gets started, and all the evidence that related to it. So then what's the evidence that showed that there were these kicks? Well, you had 2 witnesses that testified in relation to it. One was the arrestee himself. During the course of the internal affairs investigation, as testified to and reviewed in the chronological log, the investigator attempted to contact the arrestee, and the investigator was a female, went down to the address he was listed at, and talked to, I think, his grandmother there. And the grandmother put the father on the phone, and they both told him that he suffered from dementia, had some illness problems. Interviewing him would be a waste of time because you never know what condition he'd be in, and he might answer yes to everything. And so the lawyer for Officer Dorner made a very short tape of the arrestee a couple weeks before the hearing. The hearing started in December of 2008, December 1st, which it took about 2 minutes, and most of the questions were yes or no. And then when it got to the part about getting kicked, he talked about, yes, I got kicked, and then when they asked him about who the officer was that kicked him, he got confused. When they asked him about the color of hair of the people, he got confused, and then they cut the tape off. They wanted to offer only that into evidence. The board said, no, let's see if we can hear from him. They brought him into the hearing, and the arrestee couldn't tell you what day it was, what month it was. He could start to give you an answer about something, and then he'd trail off, and it became incoherent. And so the board gave them the opportunity. They then brought in the father, and the father's testimony was interesting because in addition to not having all the facts, he testified that his son came home. He'd been arrested, and it was like 4 days later. He came home and immediately told him he'd been kicked, and immediately took him to the hotel and immediately started telling him what was happening, even though the facts were not accurate. And the board, I believe that after hearing the arrestee testify, that there's no way that could happen that way. And the father, in his descriptions, had talked about how the son has good days and bad days, and how he can't recollect things and is easily suggestible. When asked about why didn't you, when the investigator came down to see you or talk to you, why didn't you tell him about what happened or her about what happened? That was like a month later or 2 months later. It was in September. And he said, I didn't realize we were talking about the same thing. Even though she said it was about a recent arrest, I thought it was something that happened 14 years ago when there was a warrant outstanding for him. And apparently he told the same thing to the defense investigator when he was first contacted. And he kept repeating this in a way that I think impacted his credibility. And when he was done, the board felt that his credibility was not, he was not credible in relation to relating the facts. And therefore, the board concluded that the department had met its burden, and that Officer Dorner's termination should be terminated because he had no credibility left as a police officer. So what else occurred? Well, Officer Dorner gets interviewed. Officer Dorner and the training officer on August 10th are immediately put on administrative duty. Officer Dorner goes to a desk, and the training officer goes to some other administrator. They're taken out of the field because of this incident. Officer Dorner's interviewed on October 9th by Internal Affairs. And they asked him all about what happened. They advised him he had the right to an attorney or a representative. He declined. He said he wanted to be interviewed, and they went through the whole interview. They talked to him about why he waited to delayed in reporting it, and he went through some of the explanations. There were more added at the Board of Rights. And they asked him, well, he said he's fear of retaliation because he'd had an incident in the academy where he said he was retaliated against, even though he never reported it. He said, have you been retaliated against? He said, no. They put him on the desk. He said nobody retaliated. The next working day, he goes in and reports, and when he finishes, that was like October 10th at night, and he worked over a morning watch and was done the next morning. He had left his duty bag outside with a leather jacket, and he claimed that the jacket had been urinated on. Now, this was right after they had asked him if he'd been retaliated. The department instituted a complaint investigation. They sent it to SID for testing. They found nothing that supported it. His version of why he reported it was refuted by the other officer who was present in the locker room when he said he noticed this after he had retrieved his bag. And again, it was felt that that may have been in response to when they asked him if he'd been retaliated against. Some months later, another incident occurred that showed his use of the complaint system. He received an action item. Now, an action item, and you have Police Administrator Goodrich here, or excuse me, Chief Technology Officer could explain to you about action items, but as part of the consent decree, we set up an early warning system called Teams 2, where officers' actions are put into it. They're put into peer groups, and if, for example, if they have more uses of force than within certain statistical three, I think it's three, and I can't remember the exact term, but if they're outside the norm of their peer group, an action item is automatically produced by the computer, and it's sent to the supervisor. And the supervisor then has to review it and see if there's any reason to proceed by interviewing the officer or taking any kind of other remedial action. In March, he got one of these. It happened to be, the supervisor that it was sent to happened to be the lieutenant who was the watch commander. He wanted to initiate a complaint against her for retaliation. They explained to him that's not how it works. If you feel that the action item is inappropriate because there's incorrect information, there's a form, it's called a 15-7, you submit it. Ms. Goodrich's group looks at it, and then it comes to me, and we sign to correct the Teams 2 data. He absolutely refused to go along with that, wanted to file, claimed it was retaliation, even though he was explained to him that no human being takes part in the process of producing this action item. So again, it was an example of him trying to use the system when he felt.
Does that information, was that also in the trial transcripts as well?
No. This is information I don't believe that the information about the other complaint about the jacket was really gone into at the Board of Rights. So the conclusion was there was no indication whatsoever that Officer Dorner was selected because of his race, selected because he was a whistleblower. In fact, it appeared the department had bent over backwards to keep him. He was, I think, delayed in the academy, but they kept putting him in the next class available so he could graduate. He went off to do his service. He came back. He was trained. He asked for reintegration training, and as soon as he was eligible, which I think occurred within a few days after this event, he was put through reintegration training and had done everything to try to maintain him in the department, and that this all occurred because he brought forth these false allegations. So it was my conclusion after reviewing everything that everything that was done in this case was appropriate, and there was no evidence whatsoever to believe that Officer Dorner had been discriminated against in any way, and that the Board of Rights determination was not a correct one. And I'm available for any questions that the board may have.
Questions, Dan?
I don't have any questions. I just have one comment, Madam President. I just want to thank the Inspector General for his thorough review of the department's report. In particular, given the sensitive nature of the topics and the allegations, I commend the Inspector General for the constructive and balanced manner in which the IG's report identifies issues for the Commission and for the public, both with respect to the Board of Rights and the department's report itself. Thank you.
I have 10,416,310 questions.
Picking up on
just in terms of what the procedures are, the questions will be from the Commission to Mr. Chaleff and to the Inspector General. If there are additional questions from the audience, those are questions that have to be at a different forum and at a different time. We cannot take questions from the audience.
Yes. Regarding the Inspector General's review, there were a couple of areas that, where there were some differences. One, as it relates to witnesses, it appears, Mr. Taylor, from your report that you gave greater credence to to the witnesses, the hotel employees that were involved, and the question was raised by the Inspector General, not just a question but a concern that none of those witnesses observed the entire incident. That different ones observed different parts, which would raise some question as to whether or not they really, in fact, the fact they didn't see the kicks maybe was not was understandable because they did not witness the entire incident. I'd like to maybe have some comments from both of you on that, but also recognizing that there's the issue of the physical evidence, which is a separate issue that would document to a greater degree the presence or the absence of the kicks.
I reviewed the interviews of the witnesses at the use of force during the use of force report during the investigative complaint investigation and at the Board of Rights, where I said 2 of them testified and were subject to cross-examination. And having practiced for over 40 years and tried many cases, I was skeptical of witnesses' testimony just because people don't remember everything. Your memory is not a tape recorder. It's sort of like you remember parts of incidents and then we tend to fill in the rest. What was significant to me was that if you put all these witnesses together, and they were all over the place, who was where and what, and one of them even had the female on top of the arrestee and Dorner kind of standing there. What was important to me was nobody saw any kicks, none. And the way, relying on what Christopher Dorner, Officer Dorner said, how these kicks occurred, it was my belief that somebody would have at least noticed something. But as the Inspector General, and I didn't necessarily agree with the Inspector General on other comments, but as they pointed out, whether you believe these 3 witnesses or not, this doesn't really matter because of all the other things, particularly...
I know the physical evidence.
The physical evidence and Christopher Dorner's own comments destroyed his credibility, and there had to be a reason why he had so many different explanations for what he did or didn't do. So we can disagree on what these 3 witnesses did or did not see. My conclusion was that if there had been these violent kind of kicks, the ways, whether there were stomps or swinging kicks like you're kicking a can or a football, somebody would have seen it. Now, we could have gotten into the fact that where the training officer put herself, it was impossible for her to kick the way Officer Dorner said it because she was up against the wall. If she was in the place that some of the witnesses put her, they would have seen the kick. So it wasn't... It was there, it was something to consider, and it was certainly, in the end, it comes out that the evidence doesn't support the fact that there were kicks.
Yes, Commissioner. When we were doing our analysis, we looked at all the same information that Mr. Chaliff had looked at, and I think Mr. Chaliff is right. When we have a disagreement on what these witnesses might have seen, but it really is a disagreement that doesn't affect any of the outcome here, and I can explain why. Whether there's witnesses that witnessed the training officer strike or not strike the person, so we have, according to kind of a composite theory from Mr. Chaliff was just describing, that there's evidence that no strikes occurred. What we're saying is we can't tell with the witnesses one way or another, and we take a very conservative approach, but if you take that information out of the mix, and you just look at what's there, you take away the supporting evidence, there is little or no evidence to show that any kick occurred. There's no percipient witness other than Dorner. There is no corroborating physical evidence at all, and you're really left in a situation where you have a credibility question between the 2 officers. And so what we've essentially said is, even if you were going to take the most conservative approach possible and take that information out of the mix that arguably supports the training officer and look at things in the most skeptical light, that it doesn't change the conclusion at all, that you arrive at the same place, because once you look through the entire process and look at the opportunities that Dorner was given to actually testify and present his case, cross-examine witnesses, and the ample opportunities that the Board of Rights gave him to explain why he did not report initially the assaults and some of the other theories that he had, it was clear that his credibility was compromised. And so if a Board of Rights, and I think the Superior Court and the Appellate Court agreed, if a Board of Rights or anyone was looking at the 2 individuals and comparing the credibility, it was not improper to find against Dorner because his credibility was so damaged.
During your exhaustive review, and can appreciate that this was a very, very comprehensive and exhaustive review and time-consuming, among other things. One of the certainly one of Dorner's allegations, and I appreciate your point about him coming up with all kinds of explanations. Sort of different every time he was confronted, which obviously would go to the credibility issue. But one of the complaints that he raised, and of course historically one that has been raised sometime in the past about if you're a complainer, you know, there's a tendency maybe to get labeled. So I'm wondering, throughout the course of your review, was there any kind of indication? Obviously, you ended up deciding that there was no concrete evidence, but is there any kind of indication that here's a guy who's always complaining about stuff? You know.
No. There are some issues of personality issues while he was in the academy. Didn't relate to complaining. He initiated one complaint while he was in the academy, which was sustained against one fellow recruit. But no, there was none. In fact, even the training officer didn't testify he was always complaining. She testified he was resistant at times to training, but not to the complaining, and it wasn't like he was singled out because he was complaining about anything. In fact, he only appears on the radar when he makes the complaint against the training officer. Other than that time, he was going through his training. They did the reintegration. Had this not occurred, he might unfortunately be a member of the department. So you can't find, there was no, I didn't even submit, I mean, and I'm pretty cynical when it comes to reading reports. I didn't even see a hint that anybody he was being he was picked out in any way because he was complaining about anything until he reported these alleged kicks on August the 10th.
Recognizing that you and Inspector General came out in the same place in terms of final conclusion, but another area that the Inspector General pointed out was a question of motive. You know, and you came out in different places on that issue. Would you elaborate?
Sure.
Both of you.
Yes. I reviewed, after reading the Inspector General report, I went back and reviewed again the testimony of who I believe they said was the watch commander who said he was progressing normally or satisfactorily. What that watch commander said is he really didn't see the reports. He didn't have regular meetings with his training officers, and he didn't have any, what he really said is nobody told me he wasn't doing okay, and basically he says he's making an, I think what you read through it is he's making an assumption. What I found particularly interesting about the motive and why I said that, because to me it was important. Why would he do this? And that's in the report, and I didn't mention it initially, but why would he have done this? For no, you know, if there had to be a reason, whether it's rational or irrational, there had to be a reason. So I looked through the whole pattern, and that's why certain dates became important. That's why this event occurs on July 28th. August 4th, the training officer claims she had this conversation with him, which was the last day they worked together, and that's the day she wrote her weekly report about him. August 9th is the date he gets served with this weekly report, which showed 3 needs for improvements. There's 1, 2, 3, I think there's 5 categories. 3 is satisfactory. You always want to be on the right-hand side as you look at it, because that's the 4s and the 5s. The 1s and the 2s, the 1s and the unsatisfactory, and the 2 needs improvement. He had 3 2s for report writing and common sense and officer safety, and she says that's the day she talked to him. August 9th, he gets these. The next day he reports it. August 9th is the day he calls his friend and said, oh, I have this problem. To me, that was corroborated by what happened with the jacket. They asked him on October 9th, have you been retaliated against? He says no. PSB does, Internal Affairs. The next working day, he comes in and basically files a complaint that he's been retaliated against because of reporting the training officer by somebody urinating on his jacket, which, by the way, everybody thought he had left it outside. It's harbor. It was, one of those misty kind of nights. But they followed through. They did sample of what was on the jacket, and then the same thing about what happened with the action item, that when he's confronted by something that he doesn't like, he reacts by filing a complaint against somebody. And he had done that on at least these occasions. So to me, it showed that, at least in his mind, whether it was true or not, whether it was rational or not, in his mind, he felt he was in jeopardy, and therefore he reacted to the training officer by coming up with this story. It's interesting because in his manifesto, as it's been called, he makes an allegation about a use of force that happens 2 weeks before, where he claims that this training officer was such a sadist and brutal person, she basically put her arm on the skin of an older woman and just slid it down in a really violent way that would cause this woman's arm to bleed. And that she had old skin, the woman, and that's why this happened. Turns out when you look at that use of force report, the woman had a pre-existing injury. She had a bandage on it that was already bleeding. And that was the testimony of everybody who was at that use of force. So it just said to me, when you looked at the whole totality, that whatever rationality we may think whether we think is irrational or not, that was his mindset and that was his motive, and that's what I came up with. And I might say that in all of this, I have great respect for the Inspector General. We've both tried lots of cases. Lawyers all can disagree, and we always do. So, I think that my analysis was correct, but I'm not going to say that theirs was
And he thinks
any
it is
less correct.
Mr.
First, I wanted to. I was remiss in not introducing Assistant Inspector General Kevin Rogan, he and his section were principally responsible for reviewing the report for my office. So I apologize for not doing that sooner. But to talk about the motive issue, again, I think this was another example of where we disagreed on what the evidence showed, but it really had no material difference. Is whether there were 5 people that witnessed or heard these statements, or just the training officer, you're not in a better position to disprove that these actually occurred or didn't occur, because it could have been a situation where the training officer could have spoken privately to Dorner and said, I'm going to give you an unsatisfactory review, and Dorner could have took that to mean that he was going to be eventually terminated from his probationary status. So although we go into great detail about what there is or isn't as far as the motive, I think we're left kind of in the same position as the department at the end of the day, that we don't know if this actually occurred or not. And I think in the greater context, Mr. Chaliff is referring to both of our trial experiences. The motive issue and whether you're able to hammer that down or not, I don't think is dispositive to any of the greater issues in this case. I think it's maybe one part of the puzzle, but in this case, it's a part that we're not able to say did not occur. I don't think we're in a position to say that even if there are no other witnesses that can corroborate what the training officer said. So again, this is one of those minor differences that we had with the department that doesn't, and I mean minor in the sense that it doesn't change the ultimate conclusion. I think we both agree with the conclusion, but yes, there was a disagreement as to the motive, but again, I don't think it changed anything as far as where we both come out as far as the conclusion.
If I can add one thing. As part of our interview process, we did find a few people that said she had mentioned that to him. It wasn't to them that he was having problems and she might have to do this, the unsatisfactory rating. But that was not presented to the board, and it was not part of the ultimate determination, so it was just there. But I agree with the Inspector General. Really, the bottom line is, and that's why I said rational or irrational, we don't know what was in his head. Obviously, none of us could ever fathom why he did what he did ultimately. So he may have thought that, but I found that the coincidence of dates, both August 9th, August 10th, October 9th to the next working day, which was October 11th, and then the action item of him using the complaint system seemed to me to be at least corroborative of the fact that he thought that there was a problem.
One other question, and
I have one more question on this part.
Oh, sure.
On this part. You said that he did have something in his hands that showed less twos on some of his characters.
Yes.
What document was that?
That's one of the weekly training officer report, and that was the one from July 28th to August. I forgot the exact date. I think it's August 4th, or August 5th. Every week, the training officer fills out a report, which is then sent to the supervisor, which goes up the chain. There are 25. We have a copy of it here. If
So
you'd
in
like
the
to see it.
questioning, it was probably that to which he
Yes.
was responding that, yes, I occasionally receive needs improvement rating
Yes.
from my training officer.
Yes, and on this one, which was dated July 28th by the training officer, and no, this is the next one. There were 3 areas in which it said needs improvement, and you can see on the. I'll just show you the form. There's a number of items listed. There's like 30 different categories, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1 is unsatisfactory, 2 is needs improvement, 3 is satisfactory. And on the one that related to the time period I was talking about, he received 3 needs improvements in the areas that we're talking about. So that's what and they fill out daily reports too, which list what activities they happen. And on one of the daily reports, she noted that he had a problem approaching what could have been an armed suspect without cover and just sort of approaching, and had to reproach him for that because she didn't want to see anybody get hurt.
I'm not sure I share the thoughts of both of you that it's probably not that relevant overall what the motive was or whether there was a motive, and we'll never know that motive. But I do think that in going through that part of the evidence, it struck me that nobody asked Dorner in that hearing about, did you receive conversation, did you hear that you were going to get an adverse ruling? And it makes me also think about something that she said in the very beginning here in the Board of Rights proceedings about whether it makes sense to have lawyers on one side of the public rights hearing and no lawyer on the other side.
I've been discussing this issue for 15 years since when I was on the commission, and that will be part of our report in relation to the discipline system if we feel there are improvements that can be made to the Board of Rights. There's arguments on both sides. Bringing lawyers in changes on both. It originally started that there were advocates and reps. There weren't lawyers involved. Over time, the accused officers began to hire more and more lawyers through the league, and the department stayed with advocates for reasons based to, it's still an administrative hearing. Advocates have a better understanding of how the department works and things like that. Some departments, like New York, has a whole court system of their own with judges and lawyers on both sides. Some have others. There's many different ways, and we'll review that too in the next report.
You raised a point that I certainly agree with. I wasn't going to open up that keg of worms in terms of the Board of Rights, but I think you make a good point. Just one final, well, I guess a combination of an observation and a question. To me, one of the important reasons why Chief Beck chose to order this review was a concern on his part that I certainly share very strongly, and that relates to the bigger picture in terms of the relationship between the Los Angeles Police Department and communities of color, in particular the African American community, where, as we all know, there's been this long tortured history, and I'm sure all of us here, certainly not everybody in the community in the city, feel that we've made significant progress. I personally do feel that we've come a long way, both today's LAPD, I think, is a much fairer department, a much more open department, and certainly, having said that, that does not mean that we're a perfect department. I think that's still a goal to aim for. So keeping in mind the importance, and certainly there were some serious allegations that were raised by Officer Dorham regarding, racism and, discrimination, and the suggestion that this is the same old LAPD. We haven't made the kind of progress that I think this commission feels that we've made, and I'm sure that the leadership of the department feels. So having said that, I know you indicated during your opening remarks that there were going to be two subsequent reports, and one was going to center around the discipline system. And so my question is a part of that report, that review, going to be to make sure that we look at the system to make sure that it indeed is fair, and that look at very objectively and to see, is it fine the way it is? Does it need to be tweaked in some ways to make sure? And I know also from previous discussions that our subcommittee have had directly with you, I know that there have been some not test groups, but some groups within the department where there have been some discussions, and of course you had the anonymous, the ability for people to express their viewpoints anonymously. So where are we going to go with that?
The answer is absolutely. And if I didn't state it clearly before, let me repeat. The second report will deal with the discipline system and employee relations, how people feel not only about each other, but how about the department. One of the things I think, I'll give you a little hint, we've discovered is most officers don't understand the discipline system, period. And that's why I went at great length at the beginning of this, because if they didn't understand it, I'm sure most people who aren't in the department had no idea of the discipline system. I was on the commission for 3.5 years. I didn't really understand all of the intricacies of it, and that's why I laid all that out with the history and all the rest to let people know what happens and how a complaint is treated. So yes, we would definitely be dealing with that. It's all part of the second report. There'll be 2 reports. The third issue relates to people who want their boards reviewed, and the chief was dealing with those. So yes, that's all part of it. That's why we did all those focus groups, to see how people feel.
That's very, very important. Very important.
And I think it's the department's come too far in the last 10 years, 15 years, to not want to improve on that and to go backwards. And that's why I'm here, to make sure that we're still doing the things we should be doing. Chief Beck has always talked about that. That's one of his priorities and primary goals, and he can certainly speak for himself, but I think that's something we all think about every single day.
To me, that's a high priority.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, Commissioner.
I may have a couple of comments and a question for you. First, Mr. Chaleff, thank you. It's a very thorough report, and what you said now was really my first thoughts about the report and how thorough it was. And that explained the complaint process, the discipline process, the Board of Rights process in a public forum. And I think it's very important for the people of the city to know how that works. And I think that part of your report was exemplary, especially because I think it's a complicated process, and you presented it in a very easily understandable manner. That being said, I understand why this report, why the chief was concerned, and I share those concerns. But I may be alone in thinking that this report was not necessary, and that for 2 reasons. The first is 5 years ago, when all this happened, it was reviewed by the Inspector General then. And the Inspector General, as you know, is independent from this department and takes a very thorough and critical eye, as they continue to do. Secondly, back then it was reviewed by Superior Court and upheld, and then it was reviewed by the Court of Appeal and upheld. So 3 independent branches from the department reviewed it then, when presumably everyone's memory is better then than it is now. And secondly, although it wasn't referenced in your report, it weighed heavily in my mind, and it's weighed heavily in my mind since February, in that this actions, these cruel, actions and homicidal actions by this criminal, I think, indicated that the department was absolutely correct in terminating him. And I'm sort of a bottom line person, and I look at that as an issue. And what you said just now, that if this hadn't happened, this person still might be a police officer. And I shuddered when you said that then, and I shudder to think about it now that this person was there, which leads me to my question. I think an inquiry needs to be made here. And I know how thorough you've been, and I don't know if you guys have this planned at some point in the future or if someone else is going to look at it. But my inquiry is, how did this person become a police officer? It seems, both in the popular press and from my discussions with other officers in this department, that he had a number of problems all the way through. At the academy, displays of certain emotional instability there and as an officer. And my concern is not what we write in terminating this guy. My concern is I don't want to see another guy like this get through.
There is, I think, a motion in front of the City Council to review how, not this case, but how hiring is done right now. And this is something I regret having done when I was on the commission. The initial qualification review of individuals to join departments done by the city's personnel department. It was done by the department, and back in about 2000 it was separated. And so all the background checks, the psychological tests, whatever test else is done by the personnel department. They then give the chief a list of people qualified, and he can hire off that list. That's where we are. Should we get more? We don't even know what's in the background checks. We're not allowed to know unless we hire the person. If somebody gets rejected, we have no idea. They usually won't tell us. And some of the background stuff we don't see at all. I got all of the background information I could on him and saw his applications and others, which raised a few issues. But he was on the qualified list, and he qualified to go to the academy. And he did have injuries and stuff, and there were some personality issues, but there was nothing he did at the academy that would rise to the level of terminating him. And a number of people are terminated as they're going through the academy or as they're on a probationary status for things they do. He didn't do any of those. So I think right now the City Council, there's a motion there about changing some of the process, and we can come back to the Commission and explain that, but it's a process that the department doesn't have total control over.
Has the department shared its views, excuse me, Commissioner Ray, I'm sorry, has the department shared its views on things that we think we can do to improve that system?
Yes, and the chief.
The department has shared its views, and you know, this is some of the discussions I'll have and have started having with the new mayor and with the City Council. You know, this is something we talked about long before Dorner, and that discussion will continue. You know, the department, the chief and the commission and all the 13,000 men and women of the department are responsible and feel the pressure from the actions of one of our own, but we don't have any control over who those people are, and that's not right. So one of the things we're working on, and one of the things that I will actively push.
Thank you, Chief.
And by the way, on that point, I, as one member of this commission, colleague, and have a lot of respect for him, I respectfully disagree. This report was important. It was absolutely important because in many ways it potentially, you know, this is a tenuous relationship that the Los Angeles Police Department has between itself and communities of color, and in particular, the African American community. And we, as I said before, we've come a long way. And I think in many ways, the credibility, because, you know, you can do all kinds of wonderful things, have all kinds of great things happen, but all you need is one setback, you know, one incident. And there were some very, very serious and wild allegations included in that manifesto. And there were some people out in this city and in the community who believe it. And I think it's important that we have this kind of comprehensive and thorough review have this kind of transparency so that the majority of people, I'm not so naive as to think that everybody's going to believe it. I mean, there'll still be some critics out there who will, dismiss the whole process and the whole report. But to me, it was very important, and it's important we have this kind of healthy self-examination, both as relates to the specifics involving Officer Dorner. And make no mistake about it, I, for one, and I haven't heard, there have been a few people, but I haven't heard anybody, well, let me take that back. The overwhelming majority of the people in this city totally condemn that murder rampage, but that's a separate issue. That, let's don't link the two at all. He went on a murder rampage, and that's totally, totally unacceptable and offensive. But it's important that as we move forward, that we ensure that we take every reasonable step to make sure the Los Angeles Police Department continues along the path of being an open, fair department that polices every part of this diversified city with respect, and also treats all of its officers, regardless of their race, their religious background, their sexual orientation, fairly. So I didn't mean to lecture you, my friend, but I'm sorry. I have to take a very, very serious difference of opinion. This report is important, and let us not in any way diminish it.
If I may just add a comment. One, you'll notice that other than a statement at the beginning, there's nothing tying up what he did in 2013 with whether or not the department acted appropriately. I felt that was not, what we were doing is looking at, did we do the right thing back in 2007, 8, and 9? That's what was important. It would have been easy for anybody to just say, look, this guy's a homicidal maniac, forget everything he said. The chief didn't do that. And I will tell you what I told the chief, what I told Chief Bratton when he asked me to write about May Day in 07. I'll look at everything. What'll be in the report will be my views on what's positive and what's negative. And if I had found something that pointed to a different conclusion, you would have read about it. And that's what the chief wanted. That's why he, said to me, go work on this report. So I think that we can, have some discussions about little individual parts of this, but I think overall there's no question that there was no bias, no discrimination, no attempt to prevent somebody from blowing the whistle in what happened to Officer Dorner, and what happened to him he brought on himself.
And I might also add that as a commission, and certainly particularly Commissioner Druin and I, who were sort of the subcommittee of the commission, felt very strongly that it was important that the Inspector General also provide an independent review and analysis of this entire incident, to make sure that that we assumed our independent oversight responsibility in a responsible way. So to me, that's an additional aspect to dimension to this whole process that was very critical.
I agree with you.
We do have two public comment cards, Madam President. We have Kyle Ballard and Yvonne Michelle Audrey on item 8A. And item 8B, they're speaking on both items.
Thank you very much. Kyle Ballard. I graduated from UC Berkeley in 1965 as a member of the free speech movement class with honors in accounting. 3 years later, I passed the bar the first time I took it. I am not now a licensed attorney. I do want you to know my opinion. My opinion, I had no respect for his. I have no respect for his report. Lies. And you have to give that consideration. The number one lie in this whole report is, and you know, Chief Beck, is the arrest of that person at the hotel was unlawful. illegal and unlawful. Two words missing from all the reports are the word felony and the word misdemeanor. This was not a felony arrest. This was a misdemeanor arrest. Maybe you could take a couple of minutes and tell us in 17 words or more or less on the rights of your officers to arrest for misdemeanors and their duty not to arrest for misdemeanors. You want to do that?
It's not a discussion. Go ahead.
Okay. Though there makes two gorillas sitting right in front of you. The one gorilla is the false arrest. Nowhere in there do they describe that because they can't. And the other one is when they found out that this arrested person was a mental defect. Here's a mental defect. He's been kicked in the head twice. He's been tasered twice. And then he has a serious mental defect. The excrement hit the fan twice. Okay? It hit the fan the first time when they found out that they made an unlawful arrest. I don't think Dorner knew that. I think that woman knew that, or she knew it pretty quick, and that explains a lot of the delay that he is charged with here. And the other one is when they found out that he had a defective mind. That's got to be looked into. Now, I got 2 more minutes here. I'm up here for 2 things.
No, they're just 2 minutes, sir. Yeah. Oh, should we do it together?
I got 2.
Yeah. Oh, do it together if we're for A and B.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. The other one was when they found out that he had a mental defect. Now, he made a big deal in the report about the statement of the father being hearsay. It was not hearsay. Okay. It was not offered for the truth of the matter asserted, which is the litmus test for hearsay. It was part of the res gestae. And if not part of the res gestae, as I think it was, I could certainly argue that it was part of an out-of-court statement that was offered to prove the consistency of a prior statement of a witness. And that's what we're dealing with here. Now, in a minute and 24 seconds, I feel really impaired here because they had all the time in the world. But when you're looking at a case, you have to begin with a theory. That's where you start. Until you get a theory, you can't get your hands on a case. And in order to get a theory of the case, you have to find out what the facts are. These 2 reports are false facts in there. So many things wrong. I'm asking this tribunal to give me 30 days, maybe 60 days to write a counter report. There's no counter report here. The attorney, and I have some documents here I want to put in, and you have to look at everything through the prism of Evidence Code Section 412, as in Badge Instructions 2.02. I want to leave this. Rigors of fee agreements. You need to get the contract between his attorney, who's not named. In the beginning, they mention a description, but they give no name. In the end, they continue with the description, but no name. They're covering up his name. You need, under the law, he was duty-bound by law and ethics to have a contract. You need to see what that is. You need to get his timesheets. He's got a lot. Somebody's got to pay the attorney, but we don't know who did. I think Chief Beck paid the attorney, from all of what it looks like. And get this book off the internet, Unnecessary Evil: A History of American Distrust of Government. $3.79 at isbns.net.
Thank you.
Yvonne Michelle Autry.
Yes, thank you for an opportunity to address the commission. I just think, there's just such lies. I'm a 10-year stakeholder resident of downtown. I was born in Inglewood 47 years ago. First of all, I'd like to remind you of the history of the LAPD, and it's such tokenism, Mr. Mack. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. The history of the LAPD, most recently especially Dale Garrett, we have the most recent stomping of a black female in the groin. So how is it so incredulous or incredible that this should occur? It's an obvious cover-up, government cover-up of an impropriety, an inappropriate, and illegal act committed by a white female that was witnessed by a black man. So to maintain the status quo and maintenance of an image which you're trying to promote, which I guess you're trying to deny the fact that you have a history of illegal and inappropriate use of excessive force, police brutality, and profiling. I remember this. I'm a member of LA Kent. We have submitted over 300 reports exposing police brutality, exposing uses of excessive force, and they have all been returned to us as unfounded. Unfounded. How can over 300 plus of residents be considered unfounded in their criticisms of and expositions or in exposing police brutality, the suffering that they continue to endure? Most recently, not only was there the stomping to death of the black female perpetrated by a police officer, but we have the history of Devin Jackson in Inglewood, even though that's Inglewood PD, of abuse of a person who was misdiagnosed as mentally imbalanced or someone who was mentally challenged. Again, this is a cover-up. I just don't understand how you can continue in trying to purport yourself as being a police department with this history. I have 2 more minutes. So in light of this, and I thank God for this man's comments, not only do I think that there should be another investigation, which we will undoubtedly change or alter some of the facts that you have to continue in maintenance of the status quoism of sadistic, illegal, and inappropriate misbehavior, torture, if you will, in ritual perpetrated by some of your police officers, which most police officers, I think, are afraid to expose because of the retaliation. Obviously, or because of the retribution. Again, in maintenance of the status quoism, you're not serving and protecting me. I have spoken here many times about the SARs, okay, suspicious activity reports filed by those who have continued to defame and assassinate my character because I am a whistleblower, because I have been a victim of human rights violations, civil rights violations, and to cover it up, to undermine my testimony in exposing white supremacy, which plagues this agency as well as every other agency in America to date. You know, I have been falsely accused and maligned and defamed as every possible criminal disposition. So, like I said, I consider this to be lies. I appreciate this man's comment. For the record, I know what this country, whether it's black ops, special ops, undercover police officers, can do to maintain status quoism. And in undermining the testimonies of witnesses or whistleblowers who survive or victims, how many times have black men been beaten and then accused of 5 or 6 accounts or 5 or 6 charges of assault on a police officer? That's happened to my friends. It's ridiculous. It is. And I've lived to tell about it. I'm not a pedophile. I'm not a crack addict. I'm not a prostitute. I'm not a transsexual. So you need to listen.
Thank you.
That is the last card, Madam President.
Madam President, may I comment before the commission votes?
Certainly.
First, I want to thank Mr. Chaleff. He spent a couple of months of his life now on this. He did a tremendous job. You know, I think this was important to do for the reasons that Mr. Mack mentioned, but also because, you know, I am a product and a student of this police department, and it was important for me to have somebody that I work closely with look at this to make sure that we did things correctly. Nobody understands the organization in the way that I do, and when I look at things, I look at it through a different lens, and I not only agree with the conclusions of Mr. Chaleff's look into the Dorner firing, but I also want to recognize the importance of what is to come. You know, this was an important report, but the most important report will be the department's look into its own discipline system. You know, this is a decades-old system, predates all of us, that can, without a doubt, use some retrofitting. And so we'll look at that. And I think that the methodology that we're using, the survey of employees, is extremely important because, you know, a discipline system, oftentimes we think of a discipline system as serving those outside of the organization as a means of protecting the population from police misconduct. But but it's also important that it's supported from within the organization, but perhaps even more so. So we're going to look and see what we can do to make the best possible discipline system, one that not only is recognized for being fair by the public, but is also acknowledged as being just by those inside the department. And so that's our goal. It's a lofty goal. All of you are more than familiar with multiple systems of justice within our country and throughout the world, and none of them are perfect. But all of them can strive for that. So anyway, thank you very much, Jerry. And the Inspector General also, I think that, this is now the sixth layer of review of this incident. And all of them have found that what the department did in this case was not only right, but it was just.
Thank you, Chief. I could not agree more that this is only step one and part of a much more important issue for the whole department. I think the analysis of this individual case does show us that no system is perfect. You can look at these systems somewhat differently, and that's no different than, as the Chief said, other courtroom proceedings. But it's helpful, I think, very helpful, to have had that much detail, to have looked at all of the documents. And the Inspector General's analysis of the process at the end of page 4 reiterates that all of the documents, records, and transcripts have been read. There were not significant issues with the process. No evidence that the department did not provide all relevant and potentially exculpatory evidence. Dorner and his attorney were given every opportunity to present evidence, cross-examine witnesses, afforded the opportunity to present the entire case to the department, and then it was reviewed, as we've said, 2 levels of the Superior Court system. And perhaps as important as any of it, neither the department nor the OIG found any evidence suggesting that the department's investigation of Dorner's allegations against the training officer or the decision to refer the matter were motivated or affected by racial bias. And to me, that is enormously important and worth doing this individual matter. But I am looking forward to it. I know my commissioners are as well, to steps 2 and 3, because that will only enhance what has thus far been done for the department.
Madam
I move
President?
approval of items 8A and 8B.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you again. It is suggested that we take a very brief break, and it will be very brief.
One small hurdle.
Good day.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. The regular meeting of June 25th, 2013 is back in, and we are now going to move to item C, which we had continued from our prior agenda. And in order to talk to Police Administrator Maggie Goodrich. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
The report before you is in response to a motion that was made by City Council asking us to cover 4 topics and actually asking for draft policies on certain items. Fortunately, we don't need to submit draft policies because we actually have approved policies that were previously approved by the Police Commission that are in place on all of these subjects. So basically my report simply explains the existing policies, any applicable law, and attaches those. The 4 areas were, one, is in-car video considered, is it available for public release? And the response to that is that obviously in litigation, in response to a subpoena, yes, it's produced, but otherwise, typically, the investigative privilege or exemption would be asserted if video is requested. The other question was about the use of the video and how it might be used when it's not relevant to a particular crime or arrest or something like that. And basically, the special order on the use of in-car video makes it very clear that it's to be used to document the ongoings in front of the police vehicle. It's for evidence for prosecution, and it is not meant to be a gotcha, a way to monitor private conversations in the police vehicle between officers, that type of thing. The third question was about retention and whether or not we have differing policies on how we retain video depending on what that video captures. And the short answer is no. There's one unified retention policy for all video, and that's because any video could potentially serve an investigatory purpose down the line, even if that purpose may be not evident today. The current policy under the LA Administrative Code is that we retain all video for 5 years, and we comply with that. The city attorney had previously published an opinion opining that 2 years would be acceptable, but that would require the city council to effect that change in the Administrative Code. Until then, we'll comply with the 5-year requirement. And then lastly, the motion asked what the procedure is if a in-car video system in the vehicle should be faulty or not operate properly. And there's established procedure for that as well. The vehicle is taken to motor transport. Motor transport employees are certified to repair and replace that equipment. Overall, the equipment has proven to be very reliable. We've had in-car video in South Bureau now since 2010, and we asked for service records related to in-car video, and Motor Transport responded that it appears each car is serviced in relation to in-car video about once every 13 months.
Do you have any idea why the request was made?
That was mine. I was curious about that.
Well, very soon you will have come before you the contract for approval for the next phase of in-car video for implementation in Central Bureau. I think in anticipation of that, Council was looking to have some questions answered ahead of time.
Well, do you have any questions? That was our only question.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes?
Do we move?
Yes.
Yeah.
Madam President, I move approval of the report and transmission to the council.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Danny.
The I is the next report, the department's report relative to the South Bureau Gang Enforcement Detail Command Accountability Performance Follow-up.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Detective Dave Kennedy out of Internal Audits Inspections Division. This follow-up inspection was conducted at your request as well as the Chief's request to find out, basically how they were doing later on. Obviously, that first report didn't favor them very well at all. And as you can see from the testing instruments that we utilized, and again, it was just the follow-up inspection was focused on areas where deficiencies were identified in that first report. Where we could actually focus and narrow in on those particular areas. They did very well. The areas that they could have done better, and the commander could probably explain what efforts are taken at this point to do so, is in the standard-based assessments. But everything else looked very well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good morning,
Now,
Commissioners.
objections 1 through 3A, those were all 100% compliance.
That is
right?
correct,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
That's
And
fine.
it's objective 2 that we're going to hear about.
Standards-based assessment seems to be tripping up a lot of folks.
Yes, sir. Yeah, good morning, Commissioners and Chief Beck, Inspector General. Yes, we've taken an introspective look at why we can't seem to get this right with standard-based assessments, and what we came up with in South Bureau. There's 3 areas that we're going to focus on. Number 1, we enhanced our Bureau tracking systems. Weekly now, we have a status update with all the standard-based assessments, and that's driven from the Teams 2 system. And basically, it tells us where we are by area every week, including the South Traffic Command. But to take that a step further, the next part of that, one of the things that we're seeing is oftentimes the standard-based assessments actually get completed within 90 days as far as the actual physical document going to the commanding officer, but it's not getting approved within 90 days. So that report, in addition to tracking it by week, we're sending our Bureau inspection teams to do spot inspections to make sure that we do a better job in getting those assessments signed within a 90-day period, because a lot of times you have a backlog and the COs just don't get to them in time, so that has to improve. The third thing that we took a look at is our personnel assessments throughout the areas. 2 of the 4 areas had new commanding officers, and actually 2 of the areas had a new patrol commanding officer and area commanding officer, and with that came internal turnover in the area office. So we wanted to make sure we had the right teams in place and adequate deployment to handle the administrative load. So that's been done. Southwest and 77th mainly, as you see, their numbers were on the low end of the results. So both of those commands have staffed their offices. They have people working now. We think we have a handle on it. So, and our spot inspections are indicating that as well. So if there is a next report, I expect it to be much, much better than this one.
I mean, this is always a problem. I think long-term solution has got to be just some type of a tracking mechanism. You can do spot inspections now, but you don't want to have to be doing spot inspections forever. And if you get a decent tracking system in that your commanders can use, then I think that may solve the problem.
Yes, sir, and we have done that. Like I said, that weekly tracking mechanism that we have in the Bureau now, we have area commanding officers meetings every week, and each week we have the list of overdues or ones that are about to be overdue on that list, so it gives us a better handle on what we need to do.
That seems to me to be the only way to solve this problem, which is just, it's a bureaucratic problem, and we've seen it over and over and over again. And if you have a tracking mechanism and you're looking at it on a weekly basis, it'll solve the problem.
Yes, sir.
There are no other questions?
Move approval of regular agenda item 8I.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Public comment?
Yes, Madam President, we have 3. We have Nadia Khan. She's not here. Yvonne Michelle Autry. And then Ms. Wanda Solomon. Yvonne Michelle.
Really quickly, I'd ask that in the use of videos, that there is an oversight committee, not just comprised of police officers or commissioners, but members of the public, because I have been falsely accused of crimes that I wasn't even aware of or existed, and it was due to not only someone who was impersonating me or mistaken identity, but also to falsified or tampering with the video. So this again is to discredit the testimonies of those who expose white supremacy and also continue illegal and inappropriate acts committed by city or government officials, whether they are social workers, police officers, or BIDs, or any government or city, county employee. This is the extent to which this government goes to maintain its status quoism, and also in filing the multiple SARs to discredit the testimony of those of us, like members of LA CAN. Earlier you heard that Deborah Burton had been falsely accused. I went through that. I was exonerated because the person that falsely accused me did actually confess. All thanks and praise due to God, because it was only by divine intervention that I'm not serving a term right now for a felonious charge that was false. And this woman had falsely accused me of terrorist threat charge. She confessed to the city attorney, and I'm innocent. And I know that there are those who have been falsely accused, and it's covered up and swept under or put in the trash, because that's what you people do. Again, I'd like to speak up in defense of Deborah Burton, whose trial does begin tomorrow. I'd like to expose that because we are speaking on the continued racism and inequity or economic discrimination, that more members of LACAN have been arrested and subject to police harassment, and that should stop.
Thank you.
Ms. Wanda Solomon.
I have 10 copies, one for each. I'll wait till they.
Ms. Solomon, you can begin.
Yes, good afternoon, board members. My name is Wanda Solomon, and I'm recovering from my incident. I want to say thank you for making me feel so comfortable by providing a chair for me last time. As you know, I was brutally attacked on the Metro line, and I brought to your attention that I initiated and created a Solomon petition, which is coming before you now. I want to say the papers are moving, and I look forward to having this put on the agenda for your support and recognition. Also, Chief Beck, thank you for your contact with Sergeant Gomer in your office concerning my written requests about this. Also, I just heard a lot of wonderful information this morning about the LAPD, and I too have been a victim over the years, but I am an advocate. I've done many things with the LA Police Commission under the City Council, and I've done just a numerous of things. So I want to continue collaborating with you so that I can get your support. I also need to find out how to get some of these police reports. Now, Chief Beck, I can't pay for all of them, but I would like to know if the Inspector General and you can work with me on helping me to obtain some of these past reports that still linger under my name. And also, I want to find out a little bit more about the response time when 911 is called. I think that this incident can be prevented. I don't know how long it takes, but maybe we can look into that part as well. Mr. Mack, and I want you all to have a wonderful 4th of July. Let's make it safe. And I just enjoy Mr. Mack coming in, listening, and learning all that I can at the meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, and a happy 4th of July to all.
Thank you.
That's the final card, Madam President.
Yes. Oh, we do.
We're meeting on July 2nd.
We will now adjourn for closed session.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item numbers 10A and B in accordance with various government codes.
No worries. Nothing.
Item number 10A1 was discussed and the Chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. In closed session, item number 10A2 was discussed and the Chief's recommendations as they relate to drawing, exhibit, and use of force was adopted by a vote of 4-0. In closed session, item number 10A2 was discussed and the Chief's recommendations as it relates to tactics was adopted by a vote of 3 ayes and 1 no. And in closed session, item number 10B was discussed. Madam President, is there a motion for adjournment?
Move we adjourn. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Hola, soy Marisol, desde Canoga Park, la ciudad toda americana. Estás viendo LA City View, Canal 35, nuestra ciudad, nuestro canal.
I spent 50 years of my life with a heavyweight champion of the world. Everywhere he went, everybody knew him. Everybody wanted to touch him and talk to him. While the President of the United States or the President of Russia was trying to get his attention, he was picking up a baby or a young person and touching them and talking to them and empathizing with them. That's what made him a great champion. Environmental justice is the same exact thing. You have to take care of the people who don't have the power to take care of themselves. You have to represent them in halls that they sometimes are not represented in. Because if you don't do that, you're not really on a life mission that is worthwhile.
I think everybody cares about the air we breathe. I care for my family, my wife, my children. I care about my neighbors, my community. I care about the 17 million people that live in Southern California, and I work every day to try and bring them cleaner air to breathe. The South Coast AQMD is a leader, an innovator, an incubator for air pollution controls.